Well, good evening, everyone. A really surprisingly beautiful evening, actually, after the last couple of days. So thank you all for coming in a very busy time of year with classes ending at the university, spring in the air, the daffodils and tulips actually blooming. It's a really beautiful time of year when it's not Wednesday, April 24th, when it's cold and rainy. So thank you. Welcome to Making Michigan, the Bentley Historical Library's series on the history of the University of Michigan. I'm Andrew Rutledge, Bentley historian and research associate, and I'm pleased to welcome you all tonight to the university's historic Detroit Observatory, a division of the Bentley. I also want to welcome our online audience on YouTube. Thank all of you for joining us. Tonight, we have a very exciting, and I really believe timely presentation. We're in the midst of a wide-ranging conversation across society about the future organization, structure, and even nature of education. A debate that has really been given added impetus with new technology such as the internet and more recently the advent of artificial intelligence. Our speaker tonight is Bob Bain, someone who has been thinking deeply about these issues for decades. And he's joining us this evening to discuss one promising avenue for reshaping historical education, and we'll be exploring U of M's role in developing a really remarkable new way of teaching students about the past and our place in it, the Big History Project. A faculty member in the Marsal Family School of Education, as well as in the Department of History, Bob has been the faculty lead on the Big History Project for over a decade, researching, thinking, and rewriting the various ways to teach and learn about the past across massive time scales and massive geographic scales. Now, when I first talked to Bob, I was going back to my time in graduate school when I was doing a dissertation that had 3 different languages, 5 different countries, and 3 different continents. And people looked at me and said, "What are you doing?" I thought that was a bit much. The Big History Project makes that look like I was just looking at a single archive. But the Big History Project is really intriguing because it's not just a way of engaging students in new ways about the past, but it's also about teaching them how to think critically about the world and our places in it, not just today, but over millennia. Now, Bob Bain is the chair of the Secondary Education Preparation Program in the School of Education here at U of M. Before that, he was actually teaching high school history and social studies for over 2 decades in Cleveland, Ohio, before he earned his PhD at Case Western University. He then joined U of M in 1998, where his interests have focused on the intersection between disciplinary ways of knowing and the social sciences, broadly defined, and the various ways we teach and learn in all those disciplines. And he's thinking about this not just in terms of classrooms, but also about museums, online, and in our everyday lives. He's also continued working with secondary educators, both through the Big History Project, but also the World History Project, and also the co-founder of the award-winning Clinical Rounds Project. So lots of projects he's been involved with. He's thought long and hard about new and innovative ways to teach past. And in addition to all that amazing stuff that I'm just really impressed and blown away by, he's an award-winning teacher himself and just really a wonderful conversationalist and storyteller. So please join me in welcoming Bob Bain.
Well, thank you, Andrew. You've seen I have a sport coat. I will now take it off. Thanks. It's really wonderful to be here at the Observatory. The Observatory in our work has played a major role. In fact, in the Big History Project, there are 2 institutional histories. There's an institutional history of the Wilson Observatory because of Hubble's role in the Big Bang, creating the Big Bang. But there's also an important one on the Vatican Observatory, which I wonder how many people knew that shortly after, probably 2 generations after Galileo didn't fare so well with the church created an observatory, which has been one of the most important observatories in human history. It's a thrill to be here to talk about the Big History Project. The title of the talk is Making Big History. And what I'm really going to focus on is the role that University of Michigan played in adding billions of years to students' education. And I'd like you to stop and think a little bit about that. Think about the history course, the last history course you took. How often it was that it was, a rush through time. Imagine if you were taking a U.S. history course, a couple hundred years of history. And then even then, the rush through time. Imagine going through 14 billion years of time. Well, that's essentially what we're going to do. I'm going to focus on the Big History Project, and it's really a story of how in serendipity and the Goldilocks condition. Goldilocks condition is a term that came out of physics, and it argues, just like the fairy tale Goldilocks, something was too hot, too cold, just right. It's when the context for something is just right for something to emerge. And part of the story, and part of my role in it, is a whole series of serendipitous events that led to University of Michigan being involved in this, and some really important people being involved in it, and the timing was just right for something to emerge. And what we did was we created an innovative and successful educational design experiment, which is what I'm really going to talk about. So let me start with the conclusion. Give you a chance to, if you want to leave, then you can. I'm going to make 3 points. The first one is that the Big History Project offered students in nearly 200 US schools and at least 55 countries a chance to learn an integrating, coherent, and big narrative filled with 14 billion years of stuff, that's a technical term us historians use, questions and wonder. By the way, I'm only talking about people that are actually taking the entire course. There are approximately 5,000 schools in the United States that are taking segments of the course, and over 91 countries that are using it for segments of the course. My second point is that the Big History Project created a deep pedagogical infrastructure and built a course on it to enable teachers to manage some enduring educational problems. That word problem is going to pop up a lot here. I'm using the problem not as if it's something bad. I'm using it the way scholars might use it. If you go to graduate school, you're taught to figure out what is the problem you're going to work on for the next 3 or 4 or 5, or in some cases, much longer years. In this instance, I'm referring to problems that cause us to think. And as I'll argue in a bit, for educators, there are enduring problems that don't go away, that you constantly work to manage them. Well, the Big History Project created an infrastructure that allows teachers to manage some enduring educational problems to support student learning. That's the second point that I'm going to make tonight. And the third is that the University of Michigan School of Education, the Marsal Family School of Education, played a major role in developing and testing that pedagogical infrastructure. It's a proof of concept that is useful outside of big history. So I'm going to raise a series of questions that will guide us. What is big history? What's the Big History Project? How did the University get involved, and what role did we play? What are the key features of this course, and what are the deep currents of the course, its pedagogical infrastructure? Now, what you should be thinking right now is, come on, seriously? You're really going to teach a course that covers 14 billion years of time? Yeah, that would be what a timeline would look like, covering all of that stuff. Okay, so buckle up. Off we go through 14 billion years of time and through the Big History course. So first, what is big history? Big history is a research and study of over 14 billion years of time from the Big Bang to the present. Andrew says that he was studying an era. I studied as a doctoral student in history. I studied about a 45 period of US history. I thought that was an awful lot of time. Imagine being a scholar that's going to take up 14 billion years of time, which is actually all of time. Secondly, it uses multiple scales of time and space, including the largest. So we think about scales as being an envelope of time and space. And we can, just like any kind of map uses different scales, we use time and space thinking differently about it. You do that in your own lives. So if I said to you, can you periodize your life? What are the major turning points? You'd be doing this at a large scale. For me, it would be look at a number of years, right? But if I were to ask you to only scale down to your high school experience, then you would be using the same amount of the same block of scale, but only talking about events at a much smaller pace. Historians and map makers constantly shift scales, and details come into focus depending upon what the size of the scale is. In big history, we're using multiple scales, and scale switching becomes an incredibly important phenomenon. In fact, I teach a graduate level history course here on history at multiple scales, where we scale switch, studying the lives, 2 weeks in the life of a Ghanaian woman and 14 billion years of time. The third thing is that the big history as a research and teaching phenomena was named and launched in a Macquarie University course by historian David Christian in 1988. So let me introduce you to David Christian. There he is on the right. David started his world history course at the beginning of time. So there was a debate amongst the Macquarie faculty. The debate was, when do we start the course? Some people say you start it when human beings walk upright. Other people say you start it when the cradles of civilization develop. Other people say you really can't do world history until the world's connected, until you've got global interconnections. David says, no, we should be starting it at the beginning of time with the Big Bang. So his colleagues thought, wait, you're going to cover all this in 15 weeks? He said, yeah, I'm also going to add the history of the future. So I'm going to even do more. So they thought he was nuts, and they said, go ahead with it. So he began that course. He called it Big History. And what he did was he invited in, he didn't know this stuff. He's a historian of actually Russia. He wrote a really good book on the history of vodka in Russia, a narrow study. But David, an elegant storyteller and a brilliant person, invited in colleagues from the astronomy department, from cosmology, from biology. And for the 2 or 3 years, they would teach that section of the course till it got to human history. He wrote an article called The Case for Big History in 1991, which is where I first heard of him, and wrote him a note. And in it, he's really asking this question, which really starts the title of the article: what is the scale at which history should be studied? So he's really raising that question, right? Well, what he did was, for the first 3 years, other people were coming in. They were presenting stuff, right? So the cosmologists would come in and give kids information about the Big Bang, and then someone else would come in and talk about what stars light up. And then David slowly began to hear, as most historians do, a story. As they were presenting, he began to hear a big cosmic story built around major turning points. And the major turning points for him was what he called increasing complexity. So increasing complexity, I'm going to make it even simpler. So his whole big history narrative is told around major turning points. And what he argues is there were moments in human history, in the history of the universe, where things got more complex. Now, more complex is good because it's more interesting. More complex, however, also creates fragility. I mean, the first car that I ever owned in 1965, I could change the oil. I once changed the alternator. It had a radio with only 5 buttons in it. I could do all kinds of things. It wasn't very complex. My car today, far more complex. Satellite radio. I can't do anything but put gas in it, right? Far more fragile. I mean, my gosh, you need a PhD to work on my car today. And so what David did was he was pointing these things. He said, with the Big Bang, there's a universe of just a singularity, and boom, we get a universe with a handful of chemicals in it. Helium, hydrogen, and a little bit of lithium. And then he says, the gravity, 4 forces, the gravity works its magic, and next thing you know, stars light up. And stars now are the most complex things in the universe. And then stars explode, and when the stars explode, they give us all the other elements. You know that old Joni Mitchell song, if those of you that are old enough, Woodstock, We Are Stardust? That's true. We are stardust. My ring is made up of stardust. We are all stardust. Now you've got a more complex universe. And then our solar system forms. And of course, with it, the Earth and the planet. And then one of the most amazing complex things occur, life on Earth forms. Incredibly complex, but also incredibly fragile. And then eventually the human being forms. And for David, the most important thing about us is our language, because what it enables us to do is to share learning. We have collective learning. Think about that for just a second, that because we have a common language that we can, even if it's translated, I can read, I can commune with people that no longer live. I can read Plato. Whereas animals that don't have that kind of language cannot commune with ancestors that way. It's essentially what they're doing is evolving genetically and not culturally. David argues that collective learning through our language is a key feature in what makes us human. Then we have an energy bonanza. We learn to farm using agriculture, and that shapes the ways in civilization works, far more complex. For the first time in human history, we get coerced labor. We get a state that comes out of that. And then eventually, about 250 years ago, we developed the ability to use fossil fuels. David refers to this as the modern revolution. Another revolution bonanza, and that phenomenally shifts the complexity of the world in which you and I live in. So there's his cosmic story. It spread very slowly. He publishes this article in 91, and a handful of university professors begin to take it up. And I just out of interest, they write books about it. There's David's book, The Maps of Time, which I'll talk about in a second. Fred Speer at the University of Amsterdam wrote 2 books. That one is, I think, the Big History and the Structure of Humanity. Walter Alvarez, I'll come back and talk about him. He's a geologist at Berkeley. Walter's dad and he were the ones that figured out that it was the asteroid, the Yucatan Peninsula, that wiped out the dinosaurs. Luis Alvarez won a Nobel Prize for that. His book on big history is The Most Improbable Journey. It's an elegant read. Eric Chazon is an astrophysicist, and his book is on cosmic evolution. He's at Harvard. And our own Doug Northrup here at the University of Michigan, he with Cameron Gibley wrote a book called Big Ideas, which is big history. Doug's course here at the University of Michigan on big history is called Zoom, A History of Everything, well before Zoom became a way for us to communicate. Now, what did not catch on is high school history courses. There was no one in the country, I suspect no one in the world, that was teaching big history in high school. David wrote a book. This is the second version of Maps of Time, which is a brilliant book. And he also did a teaching company set of videos. He doesn't like the fact that I show this because I show it when it's really cheap. It wasn't selling very well. And the reason why I point this out is because something serendipitous and dramatic is going to happen to David and to me as well. And that is this guy. You've probably heard of him before, Bill Gates. He's been in all the newspapers. It turns out when Mr. Gates jogs on his treadmill, he watches teaching company videos. And talk about luck of the draw, he happened to watch this video. Now, it's 48 videos, 48 different things, 24 hours of essentially David standing behind a podium lecturing on big history. And Gates was fascinated by it. In fact, he went on one of those television programs and said, the best thing I've watched or seen has been the big history course. And his argument was it builds, every discipline is connected to it, and it's a coherent story that shows us where everything fits and how we got to where we are today. It's an on-ramp to understanding the world in which we live in. And he wondered, why isn't high school kids? Why isn't this in every high school in the world? And so he calls David Christian in his office. Now, can you imagine getting that telephone call? Dr. Christian, we've got Bill Gates on the phone. Yeah, right, who is this, right? And Bill and David meet. Bill tells him his idea, and David says, absolutely, I'm in. You want to create a high school course for everyone in the world on big history? I'm in. The one little caveat I've got, the one little problem, I've only taught at a university my whole career. I've only stood behind a podium and lectured my whole career. I don't know really anything about teaching in a high school. However, my colleague, Bob Bain, it was a weird connection. I wrote him a letter. We collaborated on a project in 1998. I got to know him that way, through someone else. And David said, I know this guy at U of M. He does study this stuff, and he works with schools and kids. He'd be a great person to at least talk to about it. And with that was born the Big History Project. Now, let me start really quickly with the goals. That's the last flying thing, I think. Here's the goals of the Big History Project at the outset, but I'm going to show you what we did to it. So remember, David is a brilliant, brilliant person, an unbelievable lecturer. And what his idea was, I'm going to construct a syllabus, and we'll give these lectures, just like I did with the teaching company set of videos. We'll do it for high school kids. They'll be shorter. And so the idea was, first, it was going to be a free course in big history for high school students, and sponsored by BGC3. A quick note about BGC3. When Bill Gates left Microsoft and then left the foundation as the chair of it, he opened up a small little company, which was called BGC3. Really a mom-pop shop. in Seattle. And the BGC3 stood for Bill Gates Catalyst 3. Today it's called Gates Ventures, but it's essentially a small little place doing only what Mr. Gates is, his boutique projects. Big History was, I think, the first project in BGC3. Secondly, it was going to use a Christian syllabus and narrative to then demonstrate stuff to high school kids. And finally, all the lectures and resources would be delivered to students and teachers online. Those were the key elements about it when they contacted me. The key thing on this that I still think is, which is amazing, all the resources, which you're going to see in a couple of minutes, are free and will always be free for everybody. It's crucial for Mr. Gates that every kid anywhere has access, and we'll talk a little bit about what does that mean. Having fiscal access may not be enough, but we're going to get to that. So then my call. Now, unfortunately, I didn't get the call directly from Bill Gates, but I did hear from his chief of staff. And what they did was they said, this is our plan. This is what we're going to do. This is in probably April or May of 2010. And what was clear to me was that what they were going to do was roll out an online textbook. Now, I was a high school teacher. I'd been here at the U of M for an awful long time. I know how successful high school textbooks are. Do you remember high school textbooks, right? Probably want to forget them. They're incredibly successful for the authors and publishers. My recollection of a high school textbook was not very good. And I simply said to them, look, I'm no confident you'll produce something really eloquent, but that's not the way to do this. The way to do this is the way you would do it if you were actually going to innovate something in medicine or other fields. You should do a pilot and then heavily test the pilot. So how many schools are you talking about? I don't know, 5, 6. Let's make certain we have an urban school. Let's make certain we have a large suburban school. And let's make certain we have an independent school so that we can pilot this stuff and learn from what teachers are actually doing, because that will really be the ways in which we can scale this up. And so the real dark secret to this was I saw this as a real opportunity to actually apply the scholarship on teaching and learning that I had been doing, and more importantly, my colleagues had been doing. So obviously, they buy this, and I'm going to be in it. But let me take a second or two to talk about the U of M research and development. I'm going to go through this very, very quickly. I wish I could spend a little bit more time on the research that myself and my colleagues have been doing at the Marcel Family School of Education. There's a reason why, I'll brag up on us. We're always in the top 10 in schools of ed. I think we're maybe number 5 and maybe the second public education school in the country. And it's because not only we do a good job of preparing people to teach and doctoral students, but because of our research. And there's a number of people. For example, we focus on problems of teaching. My colleague Magdalene Lampert wrote a book called Problems of Teaching and Teaching with Problems. What does it mean for a person to convey information that they understand to people who may not even want to be there, or people who have a wide range of knowledge and background? What does it take? How do you manipulate that? How do you engage them? What kind of environment do you construct? Or what does it mean to teach with inquiry problems? What does it mean to spend time first hooking your students into a question and then getting them to begin to explore the question, rather than, as most schools do, here's the answer, learn it first, then we'll ask some questions. A key concept is a comprehensive, or what we call educative curriculum. My colleague Deborah Ball and David Cohn phrased this word in educative curriculum. That's a curriculum that teaches not only students, but teachers. Prepares the teachers with the content knowledge they need to teach. At the same time, they're learning how to teach it to different people. And that will become an incredibly important thing in big history. I mean, I steal that idea and run with it, because imagine, there is no high school teacher who is well prepared to teach cosmology, geology, biology. I mean, I often say that when I started this course and we started talking about chemistry, I'd say the last time I took a chemistry class was in 1965. I think there were only 4 elements: earth, wind, air, and fire. The idea is that the curriculum should be comprehensive, meaning it provides not only resources for teachers, not only for students, literacy things, assessments, professional development. We use disciplinary thinking. That means if you're teaching mathematics, that's different. The kind of thinking that a math teacher does is different than the kind of teaching that a history teacher does. We all use the word proof. But trust me, a proof in geometry is way different than a proof in history. We use disciplinary literacy. The dean of the Marcel School, Elizabeth Moji, is one of the scholars of disciplinary literacy. How is it that students read different texts? What are the challenges to read different texts? What does it mean to produce different texts, to write different texts? What does it mean to frame different problems? We also talk about scaffolding student thinking so that we support them. A scaffold enables you to do something you couldn't do without it. We enable students, as we'll talk about in a bit, to do very complex thinking before they are able to do it on their own. In a sense, we give them cheat sheets. It's the equivalent of the periodic table at the back of a chemistry classroom. That you don't have to actually memorize it, but once you know how to use it, it's a tool that enables you to do all kinds of cool stuff. We've got people who are work on what does it mean to develop an understanding of concepts. That's some of my work. Or critical thinking, also some of my own work. So I'm going to reference back to this. I wish I could name all the people. I only cited a handful of them. But it was my blessing not only to get this call from the Gates people, but to be in this environment where I could draw on things to actually employ this in the design of the curriculum. When we started the Big History Project in 2010, in the fall of 2010, there was only a handful of founding partners. I just wanted to point this out. Obviously, David Christian was a partner. I'm a partner, University of Michigan, and if you read that a little bit, it is working on the pedagogy. David is clearly going to develop the content. What we're going to be doing is working on the pedagogy. And Tracy Sullivan, who's a student of David's, a graduate student at Macquarie, because we decided we were also going to do some schools in Australia. When we started this project, the first year we had 5 American schools, an urban school, a private school, and a large public school. Northville High School was the school. In fact, Joe Sislo, one of the original, the Magnificent Seven teachers. Only 7 American teachers were teaching big history in 2011, right, in 2012. 2011 and 2012, yeah, we'll come back to it. And of course, the program sponsorship is Bill Gates and continues to be Bill Gates. I want to point out a whole list of contributors that helped us through this first year. There's a couple of people like Cynthia Stokes Brown, who wrote a number of the biographies. Henry Louis Gates, you probably know or have heard of. Hank Green and John Green from, he's a novelist and does really wonderful work. But I do want to point, and there's a couple of U of M faculty, which I'll come back and point to. Tim McKay is one, currently the Associate Dean for LS&A. I do want to point out those 3 people that are pictured there. So I had a small team. And the small team consisted of these 3 people. Tamara Schreiner, who's now a professor at Grand Valley State, former doctoral student of mine, was teaching at Green Hills, one of the first schools that did it, and we hired her on as a research assistant. So she was able to work with me. Molly Taylor is a lovely story. Molly was a UROP student, an undergraduate research opportunity student. When I started, I just had Tammy and me doing all this work, and so I wanted to reach out to get some more support. So we brought on Molly to do research with us as an undergraduate. She did it for 2 more years, and then I hired her on as project manager. She was that good, is that good. I wanted to stay on the academy, but she found a much better job. And then Cameron Gilblew, an interesting character, a cosmologist, earned his PhD here. He works at LS&A, knocked on my door one day and said, I'm really interested in big history, and has been instrumental. This guy actually knows the science instead of me just trying to pass as a scientist. That is the last thing that's going to fly away. So I talked about enduring problems. Once we started with this, I started saying what we should be doing is not just saying to teachers, guess what, we're going to come with all this really cool big history stuff, and what you're going to get is this cool course. Rather, what we should be saying is, what challenges are you facing that we can help you meet? What problems of teaching practice? So let me just identify some of these problems relatively quickly. One, there's a problem in adolescent literacy in this country. I won't go into the statistics on it, they're not pretty, but there's a logical reason for this. We teach a lot of reading and writing in the elementary grades, a lot, when the reading and writing is relatively simple. But as you go through school, the reading and writing becomes far more complex. And then do we add more amount of teaching reading and writing on complex subjects? No. So it kind of makes sense, right? The complexity is growing higher, but the amount of time we're teaching them is less. So we decided we were going to really stress this. We know there's all kinds of issues in kids learning math and kids learning sciences in the core content. I don't have to tell you about under-resourced schools. I'm about to. One of the schools that was in our first study, our first pilot, was a school in San Diego. The big history class was taught with 45 ninth graders in a room that held 30 ninth graders, should have held 30 ninth graders. Kids were sitting on the ledges with an amazing teacher, and also taught in a private school with 12 kids. So the discrepancy was huge. And Mr. Gates was totally committed to make certain that whatever we did would work in that setting as well as in that setting, which was why it was important that both were in there. I could argue about citizenship education. One needs only read the news. I won't go any further. I will stress the whole thing about curriculum in pieces. I'm going to come back to it, and the issue of disengaged students. How do we plan to manage this? I'll just give you a hint. We took all the stuff I was learning from my colleagues. Let's have purposeful reading and writing. So let's teach how you read and write complex text. Let's include all the disciplines. All the disciplines are in the Big History Project course, and I'll come back to that. As I just also mentioned, all the resources will be free for schools forever. This could be the only history course that could be taught really everywhere in the world. And the point of the fact, when I just said that 91 countries are drawing from the Big History Project, over 55 are actually teaching the entire course. Many of these are being done in English. The Koreans translated it. In Denmark, they translated it. It's a translation in Spanish. I'm going to make an argument about what does it mean to have a big narrative, a big picture, to put the pieces together, and then I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about interesting content to the big human questions. So let me start with the first one. I want to make an argument that the curriculum in American schools, and probably most schools, is in pieces. And let me just show it to you. In some ways, I think I taught in a high school for 26 years. The different departments could have been on different continents for all that we actually interacted. And the students experienced it in fragments. So what you see here is a model of how a high school vice principal makes up a schedule. What he does is he takes the teachers and then the courses that need to get taught, and it's like almost musical chairs. When a bell rings, everyone has to be somewhere. That's the logic behind it, which makes in some ways sense. But for a kid, here would be a typical high school kid. They go to Homer, and then they take Algebra 2, then they take Western Civ, and then foreign language, in this instance, Mandarin. When I was teaching in a high school, I remember vividly a time when I showed a film on the Holocaust. My class was 50 minutes, the film was 53. So I said to my students, we're going to start it right away. I'm going to write you notes on the way out so that you're going to be a couple minutes late to your class. Powerful, powerful film. And as I was writing notes, please admit him a little bit late, I'm looking at these kids and thinking, oh my gosh, what if they're going on to a test? Or what if they're coming into, no sense of what we go through when we go from one to another. Again, experienced in fragments. You may remember that. My recollection of high school was the real connectors was the time between classes when I'd see my friends. Social studies could be existing on different continents. And by the way, we could add all kinds of different ones. Let me take you through a world history course to show you that the experience could be in it. So I'll let this run for a second or two. Typical world history course as we go from one thing to another, and another, and then another, and then another. And then when we're all done with it, someone comes along and says, how'd you leave out all this other stuff? And then you should be doing this and more tests. The subjects need to be reconnected. And the model that I want to argue is it's like a jigsaw puzzle. If I came in here and said, listen, I'm going to throw 500 or 1,000 pieces on the floor, let's put the puzzle together. And you say, Bob, that's fun. What's it of? And I'd say, I'm not going to tell you. Wait, you're not going to show me the box top? Heck no. The real intellectual work is putting it together. Now, you could match up every piece and every color, but it'd be miserable. That's the argument of why so many students go through school and it's painful. They don't know how their first period class connects to their second, or how what they studied in September connects to what they're studying in October, which also has to do with disengagement. That's what David Christian gave us with this big overarching story. In a sense, it's an intellectual box top. It provides a big frame to help learners locate the stuff. And in the Big History Project course, we teach the box top immediately. By the end of the first week, the kids can give you over the 8 turning points, the 8 thresholds of increasing complexity. And what it's doing is attempting to give the students a larger structure so that when they go into other classes, they'll recognize it. I'll show you later an investigation we do on how Mendeleev invented the periodic table, and a whole assessment the kids analyzed for why it was important. When that kid walks into the chemistry classroom, they get why that thing is so doggone important, though they may not know how to use it. But in a sense, we're introducing them to that. Now, there's all kinds of horror stories about disengaged students. The federal government once did a study and said that 45% of American students are chronically disengaged every single day in every single class. That number may be low. Now, kids, as you know, are enthusiastic and have all kinds of wonder, and they have great questions. I've got when I started this, we had a 3-year-old friend who then was curious about a lycocon and invented this species that could survive in the desert. This is the lycocon's lair. There's a little heat and stuff like that. But something happens to this that becomes this. And I always argue that schooling was often a bad game of Jeopardy, where the answers were separated from the questions. Too often in school, the goal seemed to be to learn someone else's answers in order to answer someone else's questions, but the questions came afterwards to see what you learned on standardized tests. Little Bobby Bain figured that the only reason teachers asked questions was to find out whether or not I had done my homework. By the way, the curriculum comes in pieces too. So if you're not a teacher, this may be unusual to you, but these are the state standards, which are lists of stuff that teachers have to cover. No connection, no questions, nothing, no intersections, one thing after another. It lends itself to multiple choice worksheets. Now, that's not how knowledge and understanding are born and grown. Let me cite another one of my colleagues at the University of Michigan, John Dewey. We really weren't peers. He was gone a long time before me. But Dewey wrote in this Quest for Certainty that all knowledge, everything you and I know, everything that we have, was once upon a time a question that someone answered. Once upon a time a difficulty that someone disposed of. Once upon a time a confusion that someone cleared up. Once upon a time a perplexity that was mastered. Everything. My glasses, the water bottle, was once upon a time a problem that someone solved. What we're trying to do in the Big History Project is to reconnect the school stuff, that's that technical term again, to human questions, confusions, puzzles, and perplexity that generated this stuff in the first place. So everything in our course begins with questions, big questions. What happened? Why should we care? How do we know what we know? And we ask the kids to conjecture first. We don't simply say, here's a question you should care about. Here's a question, what do you think about it? And then what they're doing is assessing their own thinking against what the information we're going to give in the course. So, and these are all David Christians, we start with what is big history? What does it mean to look at things far away and close up? What does it mean to look at things like we're about to do through a telescope or through a microscope? Why does scale switching matter? Is one better than the other? We show them in that section, we show a picture of the Eiffel Tower, and we say, which is the best picture of the Eiffel Tower? So one picture shows France with the Eiffel Tower a dot and Germany next to it. The other picture shows the typical picture of the Eiffel Tower, and the other picture shows the girding of the Eiffel Tower. And eventually the kids say, that's a pretty dumb question. Like, it all depends what I'm looking for. If I need to know how to get to the Eiffel Tower from Germany, the girding doesn't help me. If I want to send a picture home to show I was at the Eiffel Tower, the girding isn't exactly the most pretty thing. And that's what we do at the beginning. We also look at how our understanding of the universe has evolved in the Unit 3. How did stars emerge and what did they give us? How did the sun and the planets form? How do we define life, and what do we know about life? How did our early ancestors live? What happened with agriculture? Why was that so revolutionary? Why did it change dramatically the ways in which we lived? And then how and why has the rate of change accelerated over the last 250 years? And then what an amazing way to end a history course with a whole unit on what's next. What's the future? How do I use my understanding of the past to anticipate, possibly, the future? Now, let me give you a short example of I'm only give you a short clip of a video that David does, which shows you the problems. You ready? He says, hoping it works.
Imagine you're in a time machine and you've traveled back 4.5 billion years. And what you're doing is you're taking a stroll on the early Earth. Now, what would it be like? And would you be having fun? Well, the answer is, I don't think you'd be having much fun. First, you'd be walking on molten lava. Not nice. Secondly, you couldn't breathe because there's no oxygen. You'd be asphyxiating. And thirdly, you'd be ducking asteroids and meteorites that are crashing into the early Earth, lots and lots of them. And fourth, you'd probably be throwing up because of very high levels of radiation. And if you stayed there too long, your hair would start falling out too. So I don't think you want to stay there too long. Why was the early Earth so hot?
And the problem is set up. So in that short little video, David gives you, a sense of it, and now the question is thrown to the students. And all of this is like that. It's engaging in these sets of problems. But you see what we've had to do first, you had to hook the kid in that question. But the problem that we faced, particularly in the second year of the course, was we didn't want this course to simply be David's lecture. We wanted to add more stuff to it. And we were convinced that doing big history must involve other thinkers and other texts. And because we wanted students to learn from as many experts and from as many multiple disciplinary texts as we could, here again, I'm applying what I learned here at U of M. What does it mean to use disciplinary thinking? How does a cosmologist think differently than a chemist? What do we use disciplinary literacy? How do we use big ideas? And so, again, the blessing of working with Bill Gates and his company, we hired the best virtual faculty to do 8 or 9 minute videos. So there's Tim McKay, our cosmologist here on our faculty, Jan Levin, who's one of the world's great astrophysicists. Henry Louis Gates talks about genetics, and there's that old, tired historian sitting in the middle. Walter Alvarez, I told you already, he and his father were the ones that resolved the issue of what killed the dinosaurs. His video is 9 minutes long, and he starts by saying, everyone likes a murder mystery. My dad and I worked on the biggest murder mystery of all. Pause. Who killed the dinosaurs? And now the kids are hooked. Nicholas Toth, we talk about Stone Age tools. Nicholas Toth talks about Stone Age tools as he takes 2 stones and makes an axe, right? That shows you he can cut it, right? He's an anthropologist at, I think, Indiana. Every one of these people not only talked about a concept, but most importantly, they talked about what their discipline did and why it was important. Tim McKay gives a lovely talk about what does it mean to be a cosmologist. And what we're doing is kind of encouraging kids to think this way. We also introduced them to some of the world's greatest thinkers. Again, Mortimer Adler once said, there's only 2 kinds of teachers, those that are present, those that are not present. And so we engage kids in all this other kind of thinking with all these great thinkers, Crick and Watson, Franklin. Crick and Watson, were the ones that discovered the DNA cell, but Ruth Franklin was really the instrumental person, a woman left out of the story. We also include texts from many disciplines. So kids are exposed to a whole set of things, including graphics, original scientific studies, infographics, posters, and even journalistic stories. We also are really big on conceptual learning. Now again, my colleagues have studied conceptual learning. It's part of my own work. What does it mean to learn a concept? How do I develop a concept to discriminate between different ideas? How do I know that a student really has understood a concept? All that stuff comes from research. What we did was we not just looked at concepts, we identified, we categorized them. I'm not going to go through all of this. We identified which concepts were foundational. If you didn't understand it, you weren't going to get the course. Concepts that were core to different sections, and concepts that if you didn't really get it, it's okay because it was supporting. There's a concept about cosmic background radiation supports our understanding of the Big Bang. Not that important if you don't really fully, deeply understand it. It's a list of the concepts. We're also developing critical thinkers. We did it by introducing the concept of claim testers. So we identified that there are 4 ways. First thing, we introduced the concept of a claim. We do this early in the course. And we introduced kids to say that there's only 4 ways you can test a claim. You can test a claim by your intuition. I think that's right. You can test a claim by authority. That person, he's got a PhD in the Caribbean, therefore, I can test his claim, I can test my claim if he agrees with it. I can test a claim by logic, reason it through, or I can test a claim by empirical evidence. So we introduced them to this concept of claim testers. I do it in a short video about going to find a restaurant and then asking different people so they can test their claims. But what we do is we introduce the kids to claim testers. We invented a comic book. There's Evie, which is the claim of evidence. There's a Big Sigh, which is authority. There's Vera, the sprite of intuition. And then Logic, whose name is Andor. Pretty clever. But they're always using it. We also develop inquiry and literacy practices. And here we teach the students a complex way to think about how all inquiry is done. And so this shapes a whole series of things that we do. You start with an intellectual problem. They can be scaled at different levels. You gather evidence. You analyze that evidence. You source it. You contextualize it. You corroborate it. You're constantly taking notes. You're doing informal writing. You're conjecturing. You're writing memos to yourself. Anyone that wrote research in here, think back to all the stuff that you did when you were doing your dissertation. We engage kids in that work. And then you produce some kind of account, either a narrative, an explanation, an argument. And by the way, that may lead to more problems. We also include research problems by unit. So every unit has an investigation that forces students to actually engage in just what I showed you. And this was a way to say we are about having kids engage in this work and not just memorize David's narrative. Not just sit there and say, I'm going to regurgitate Christian's narrative, but actually engage in these kinds of investigations themselves. So, and there's the step in an investigation. The second investigation asks the questions, when and why do individuals change their mind? It's a case study of Copernicus and Galileo. Ptolemy says the Earth is in the center of the universe, and it makes perfect sense. The sun works around every day. The sun comes up. It looks like it's going around the Earth the way I see it. And we ask kids, why did Copernicus change his mind? Copernicus is the one that put the sun in our solar system. He didn't have a telescope. Galileo did. What was Copernicus doing? How could he possibly have thought that? I taught that as a high school teacher for 26 years and never once asked the question, how did Copernicus reason? So we give students a bunch of evidence. Things about NASA's pictures of what's called epicycles. Show Galileo's notebook where he discovers the moons of Jupiter circulating around the moon. We also support kids with scaffolds to support their thinking. And each one of these things asks a very simple thing but grows more complex. So with each investigation, kids are doing more sophisticated things, and these tools help them develop far more sophisticated thinking. Kids also do what's called a Little Big History project. We ask students to pick something that they care deeply about early in the course, and what they have to do is study the history of it, but they have to take it back as far as the Big Bang. They're unbelievable. A kid did one on the batteries, a kid on yoga, the Little Big History of pasta. How do you take that back to the Big Bang? My favorite one, because I saw this, I was invited to an evening of Little Big Histories in Connecticut. This kid did a Little Big History of Disney cartoons. She loved animation. So how do you take it back to the Big Bang? She puzzles, she says, in the years immediately after the Big Bang, everything's dark. there's no light can get through, and you can't have animation without light. So there has to be gravity, has to work its magic. And then there can be light, hence there can be animation. Then she goes into the cave drawings where you see the buffalo with like 8 legs. Those people knew the buffalo didn't have 8 legs, so she theorized they were showing buffalo running. That's from a 14-year-old. Those were cool. We've got a whole rubric to evaluate. This is a text-heavy, writing-heavy course because we added that. Again, the benefit of working with my colleagues at U of M. Now, let me take the teacher problem quickly. How do you get a teacher to know all this stuff and teach all this stuff? So we created an educative curriculum. And I've shown you a whole bunch of stuff that supports the teachers in doing this. Joe Sislo was one of the very first teachers. When he started, we had nothing for him. We could embarrass him and ask him what chemistry he knew. He's a U.S. history teacher. But yet, he taught the course successfully, in part because of what we presented. One of the things that we've done is create a big history teacher community, an online group that's connecting people. And the teachers have various expertise. So here's Jenny Holloway, who wrote a blog post about how to teach the investigations. If I've never taught how you conduct real research with kids, how could I possibly conduct those investigations? Why don't I just give them the answer? And Jenny writes this long thing. Again, just a high school teacher, not just a high school teacher and a smart person. Here's some examples from the online community. This is Eric Wallstein, who asked this question. Has anyone used Jana Levin's video? He writes that. And then Greg Dykehouse, a local teacher in Michigan, says yes, and he used it to show what he explains about this. And he's really showing about the gender piece of it. And then here's Lisa Kapp, a New York middle school teacher, who says, I love this video. I use it in a very streamlined way. What other opportunity can teachers who are teaching the same curriculum have to communicate? Often teachers don't communicate across the hall, but this enables them to do it. Here's an international connection. Jonathan Gallimore, an Australian high school teacher, talks about something he's doing in human progress, and a teacher working in India responds to him. They're all teaching the same curriculum, but doing it in a uniquely different way. It is building interconnections. Or they can cross over time and space. Because the Australian teachers start the course in January and not September, here's a teacher that posted something in May, and an American teacher picked it up in October when it was relevant to them. So what you should be asking yourself is, how do all these pieces fit together? Why isn't the course in fragments? And here's where I come back to the deep pedagogical infrastructure that enables teachers to support and develop student learning. This structure that we constructed, essentially that University of Michigan has its thumbprint over, is what the course ends up being built on, and other courses are built on it. And let me use a metaphor done by Fernand Braudel, a historian, who studied different rates of change. Braudel talked about events which occur only in a person's lifetime, and then he talks about the longue durée, things that are millennia long. And what he does to teach it, he uses the ocean as an example. And he says, the waves are like events. When you watch the ocean, you sit and watch the waves. But the tide is change coming in much slower. But below that is the longue durée, the ocean currents. And the argument I want to make is the big history project course is much like that. That the thing that everyone pays attention to is this events of 3.82 billion years. It's the waves. But sitting below that are the spiraling lessons that a student goes through over a year to improve their thinking. The argument I want to make is that's the undercurrent that the whole course sits on top. And let me give you just a couple of examples of it. I already told you that we spiral the ways in which kids read text. So it grows more sophisticated. We start simple and gets more sophisticated. It builds on it. Or here's one about writing. Each lesson, by the way, the lessons are tied to developing content, are developing their understanding of writing. Or let me give you another one. This one I'll go really quickly because I know I go on. It's the problem of giving a mic to a professor who goes on and on. On and on, anonymous is what we should be doing. There's an issue about causal thinking. So scholarship, some of my own work, has demonstrated that young people, well up into college years, when they think about causes, they think about the human agent, all causes done by humans, and it's all by what comes closest to the event under study. Tends to be local, tends to be human. The problem with that is, of course, human beings are agents of change. The problem with that is there's larger context. When we moved into the neighborhood we moved into, the economy crashed right after we bought our house. The economy crashed in Michigan, and there were a whole lot of people that became unemployed, and there were foreclosures. Now, you could blame those individuals, say it was their agent, but obviously the context of choices about the larger market, choices the American automobile industry made, had a profound effect on that. Most young people don't think in those terms. They think about individual human agency. Often we teach them that. Like if a high school kid came in and said, you know, Dr. Bain, I couldn't take your test because my grandparents were old hippies and, you know, a group came into town and they took me to see them and I didn't study. I wouldn't count that. I wouldn't say, you know, the context is okay. You should have studied. We put them on it. So how do we teach kids about larger context to begin to think in a more sophisticated way? Well, I stole something from a colleague of mine. I'll show you a book that he and I have edited. Art Chapman, that he used, he's in London, and he used with his 8th graders. And the question is, was it really the straw that broke the camel's back? And in it, he tells the story of poor old Alphonse. Once upon a time, there was a camel called Alphonse for various reasons relating to an unfortunate accident during his birth. The camel had severe back problems. This was not the end of his misfortune, however, because he had an evil, exploitive owner called Frank the Camel Killer, who regularly overloaded his camels prior to take them on grueling and totally unnecessary round trips up and down mountains on his way to deliver goods to customers. The customers, shockingly, were completely indifferent to those frequent and gross violations of the rights of camels and found Frank and his antics at least vaguely endearing. And then it goes on. It proceeds to say the camels don't unionize, and therefore there's no support. And then, of course, one day, Frank loads up Alphonse, then puts one more straw on his back, and he breaks his back and dies. Then we say to the kids, what caused Alphonse's demise? And all of a sudden, the kids now come up with really smart answers. It's more than just Frank and that straw. I was teaching this in Shanghai, and one kid said, clearly it's geography. And not only did I say, what? His classmates went, what? Yeah, clearly the geography is what killed the camel. Like, what do you mean? Well, if he wasn't going up and down these mountains, it would have been a whole lot easier. So the context did matter. Now, that's not the end of it, because what we do is we ask the students to analyze their own choices, and we give them categories by which they now think of causation. Was it a political cause, an economic cause, intellectual, social, long-term, short-term, triggering cause, catalytic cause, underlying, contributing, residual, highly important, less important? Once they've got that, then you can give them a historical event. Like, let's talk about the advent of World War I. Was it the straw that broke the camel's back, the shooting of Archduke Franz Ferdinand? Were there other political causes? Were there geographic causes? And kids all of a sudden have a set of categories that cause them to think differently than they do in their own normal way. And then, of course, what do? We build in a series of spiraling lessons that build on their understanding so it grows more sophisticated. And this is the fundamental structure. So in conclusion, 3 points. I hope you can see that Big History offers students in nearly 2,000 U.S. schools in at least 55 countries a chance to learn an integrating, coherent, big narrative with 14 billion years of stuff, questions, and wonder. Secondly, we created a deep pedagogical infrastructure, and we built a course on it that enables teachers to manage some problems and help support student learning. And that this university played a major role in developing and testing this. Now, what you should be doing is say, oh, not so fast. I'm wondering, did the kids learn anything? That's the question all of you should be asking. And did the teachers benefit from using these materials, right? We know a whole lot that professors could say, that course went really well, and no one learned very much. Other courses using. So let me just show you a couple of examples, because we test this. That was also what the University of Michigan did. Here's a baseline question that a student, an inner city kid, answered to the question of what was the Big Bang. He's a 14-year-old. And this is the same question he did at the end of the course. And if you read it, it's pretty sophisticated. And this isn't done in a science class, it's done in a history class. I could show you writing results. This is going to be a little complicated to explain, but the baseline is the first test they took. They do a writing, an investigation the first week of school. And at the bottom, you see kids that are inadequate. These are ninth graders that were probably doing sixth grade work. 25% of the kids were inadequate. And then you have developing, and you can see it. And then we do another one at midterm, and then we do another one at the end of the course. There were about 2,600 students per wave on this, including Title I students, schools, and under-resourced schools. And you can see that one of the benefits of this course, which has little to do with big history, but with the writing stuff we've done, is kids improve their writing. Do they learn the big story? I love this one. This is a middle school teacher that taught, and at the end of the course he said, can you draw us pictures of human history? And they did the age of foragers, the agrarian age, and the modern age. Pretty neat. How about teachers? I love this quote. This is a teacher in Philly who said, I struggled my first 2 years of teaching because I couldn't find the right thing to teach my students. I came across the OER project. As you're going to see, we changed the name to OER for a couple of reasons. It was life-changing. The course materials had a dynamic component to ensuring my students understand the fundamental elements of history, such as continuity and change over time, writing skills, critical thinking, and more. Well beyond, you can see, just learning the big history content. This is by far and away my favorite quote of a teacher. I gave a workshop in Maryland, and I'm walking with the teacher to lunch, and she says, you know, big history enabled me to be Meryl Streep. And I looked at her and said, what are you, nuts, Meryl Streep? She said, yeah, Meryl Streep. And she says, you know, I used to be envious of Meryl Streep. And I said, well, because she's such a good actress? No. I'm envious because all she has to do is act. She doesn't have to set the stage. She doesn't have to build the set. She doesn't have to write the script. She doesn't have to prepare the food. She doesn't have to do the audience testing. She doesn't have to sell the tickets. She just has to come in and act. Not me. Until the Big History Project, I had to set the stage. I wrote the doggone script. I had to do the curriculum. I tested the students. I was doing it all. I was exhausted. I didn't have time to enact the curriculum. She said, what you guys did was you gave me all of it. You set the stage. You gave me the materials. And what I did then was made it come to life for other human beings. And I made choices. Just like if you watch Olivier's Hamlet, it's different than, Cumberbatch's Hamlet. Very different. But the script is the same. And the teachers enact it. And that seems to me really what we've done. By the way, we now refer to this as the OER project courses because this course was so successful, the Big History Project, the infrastructure was so successful, that Mr. Gates decided that they would do a world history course. So we have a number of world history project courses. All have a big overarching narrative. This one has 3 overarching narratives. I wrote this course. And then has the same kind of stuff, investigations, text, et cetera, and even a climate course. What I just presented you was a smattering of what's there because a guy named Bob Regan and Andy Cook ended up, I had a full-time job. They ended up running this thing. They did amazing things building out that infrastructure that we constructed. I've only scratched the surface here. The major developments and growth in over its nearly 13 years has been stunning. Let me really end. This is the real end by Fernand Braudel, who says, everything, this great historian says, everything must be recaptured, and we must relocate it in a general framework so that we can respect the unity of history, which is also respecting the unity of life. And I think that's what we've been working so hard to do, to relocate the subjects and thinking processes in a coherent, unified instructional framework to help students deepen their understanding and prepare them for the challenges they're going to face. We're still working hard to reconnect students to their wonderings. And did you wonder about my 3-year-old friend and his Lycacon? He and his sister are now 14 years old, and they're still wondering. And their big history course is helping to stimulate and guide their curiosity. And you can see the comic that his sister created out of her big history course, which is the evolution of everything. So I urge you to check out the Big History Project and other OER project courses. OER, by the way, stands for Open Educational Resources. Everything is free. Mr. Gates is committed to that. By the way, while you're at it, you might want to check out a new edited volume called History Education, Historical Inquiry. Okay, that's a shameless plug. And I want to thank the Bentley and Andrew Rutledge and all of you. And with that, I appreciate your attention.
I have to admit, I didn't expect Ferdinand Burdell to be quoted tonight, but maybe I should have. He was just a beautiful writer.
Yes, yes.
But that was really interesting, and I have a lot of questions. I'm only going to ask you a couple so other people can have a chance. But the first question I have is sort of, how do schools and educators become involved with the Big History Project? Do they check out the website and just say, hey, I want to adopt that, or do they reach out to you? Or?
Well, for the first, remember, we started small. So they were convinced that we were only going to do this with 5 schools in the U.S. and 3 in Australia. And so maybe for about 4 or 5 months, I recruited. We needed to find teachers that were going to be adventurous. This is not an exaggeration. When we brought them together for a meeting in June of 2011, we had 1 video. That was it. The entire curriculum was 1 video. We had given them David's book and David's video course to watch. And then we were going to launch. So they had to be adventurous. They also had to be willing to risk. They also had to be really good at asking questions. We scaled it up to 25 the next year. And with that, we were really knocking on doors. The turning point, I think, was when Tammy Schreiner, who I should have mentioned, invented with me all those investigations. And we structured those around learning to write well. And then we had data. So when you go to a principal and say, we've got this course called the Big History Project, it's 14 billion years of time. Is it in the state curriculum? No. Like, we've got no room for it. Let me show you our writing data. Like, we're showing that in this class, in the service of learning this stuff, writing is improving. We're scaffolding the writing. And so that got buy-in. And slowly it grew. And that's essentially how the course grew. Now, we have people that go and knock on doors. We present at conferences. But really, I think it was by word of mouth. The World History Project, which I constructed, was slightly different because I said, look, Big History is a boutique course. There's no state that requires it. But World History is on 85% of the kids' transcripts. So if we create a World History Project, they're more likely to go, and that's exactly what happened. By the way, one other thing I should have mentioned, and this is, again, the amazing thing about Bill Gates' commitment to educational work. All the text we were using, you saw some of it, was sophisticated. And Tammy Schreiner, Dr. Schreiner and I were like creating them arduously at 4 different reading levels because we wanted every kid to be able to discuss it, even if they're reading at a 5th grade level. Some of the texts were graduate level. When Mr. Gates heard that, he said, why? Why are you doing that? I'll hire someone to do it. So he found a company. Every piece of text in a text-heavy course is at 4 different reading levels. So that a kid can, no matter what you're asking him to read, they pull down a number that says, I want to read it at that level, which means that even if they're a poor reader, they can participate in the conceptual understanding. And you really, if you listen to some of the conversations in the classroom, you'd have no idea what level that kid read it at, which is just, again, another one of those amazing things. I defy you to find any other course that actually has that kind of diversifying effect for kids. So essentially, it's a long-winded way to say that we started by knocking on doors, then word got out. And now it is, the OER project is one of the most go-to sites anywhere in educational history. It's all free. All the stuff is free.
And one of the other things that's really interesting is the sort of just really the global aspect of this. Obviously it started with Australia and the United States, but could you tell us a little more about how it sort of expanded to what did you say was 91 countries at least teach?
91 countries pull stuff down from the site. 55 countries are teaching the entire course. Remember, the argument that I was trying to make was the virtue of the spiraling curriculum is it supports kids all the way through. You can pull down stuff. I don't know that you're going to get the same effect. but 91 people are pulling it down. I think, the fact that Bill Gates went on television and promoted it, the fact that Gates Ventures, his Gates Notes was doing it. We had a lovely cover magazine story in the New York Times Magazine, a lovely one that helped promote it. David overnight became this celebrity. The price of the Teaching Company video went up. He went to Davos. Al Gore wanted to meet with him to talk about to what effect this is affecting climate change. And so all of a sudden we became highly attractive, and I think that helped. The History Channel came to us and said, we'd like to run a big history series. So I think that's what happened to it. The other thing, for whatever reason, I got invited, blessedly, to Asian countries. I've given talks in Singapore a couple of times, Taipei, Thailand, Bangkok, China, and with, again, this interest in trying to create a global understanding of humanity. I think the nation state's not going to go away, and I think that what people want is something outside that give a real sense of meaning beyond what the nation is. And I think that spirit is what David touched, I think. It sounds a romantic way to believe it, but I actually think there's some piece to that.
That's really kind of hopeful and uplifting. That's a really nice sort of thing to envision happening in some form. But speaking of outside, most of the educators that seem to be doing these sort of courses are history educators. What has the reaction been from somebody who says, like you say, does high school chemistry? Has there been much commentary or feedback from them?
Yeah, most of it's been positive. I mean, Joe could probably answer this. I'll ask him in a bit. But what happens is the first thing, the history teacher goes and knocks on the door and says, I got to teach this chemistry stuff. I'm lost. Can you come in and give a talk? And then it's very clear that when the science teacher comes in and gives a talk, you're not really teaching all the details of science. What you're doing is teaching the high points, the concepts. They're not doing really experiments. And so that's a virtue, because what you're really doing is getting from an expert what are the conceptual understandings. And I think the science teachers liked it, because the fact that they could come in and focus on the real takeaways, and they weren't going to have to test the kids or grade the papers. Do I have that right, Joe?
I think so. One of the things that was fairly clear was that if you had good relationships across departments in a school, one of the things that was fairly clear was that if you had good relationships across the departments, you had the opportunity to really take advantage of people's knowledge and their training. And if you didn't have those good relationships, it really stood out. So helping to build a school culture was one of the benefits of the class that I don't know if we really thought about.
We haven't thought about that as a residual effect. There were a couple of teachers were paired with a physics teacher and a renowned world history teacher. The other thing about it, one of the virtues of showing that cast of characters and the scholars that were doing this, and then pointing out, Fred Spears studied as an anthropologist. Chasen is an astrophysicist. That there's a wide, and their approach to big history is different than David's. David's is clearly narrative-driven. Alvarez is not. He talks about regimes. He's a geologist, and he thinks in epochs. And so he looks at regimes. And so there are people, not just social studies people are teaching big history, but a whole wide range of it. As I was telling you, Joe's partner was a German teacher the first year that we offered it. Joe, by the way, taught at Northville High School, still teaches Northville High School. That was one of the magnificent 7 people that somehow trusted us and held their jobs, no less.
Knocked on the right door there.
We knocked on the right door.
And the other question I have, considering we're at sort of a premier public university in the world, this will be my last question, then people won't have to hear my voice anymore, I promise, is what has the reaction been among higher education? Have there been schools that have tried to adopt this in some form, or?
Yeah, it's varied. I mean, there's not one given way. There are a number of universities that are using our materials to teach undergraduate courses. The fact that the reading level goes way up to young adulthood that's fine. And they pick and choose what they do and how they structure it. I'm in a conversation with an international scholar who is using it to prepare teachers, not social studies teachers, but elementary teachers, because they have to know all the sciences. So what he's doing is he's using this course that way. So it's being offered at this university for elementary school to become a certified elementary teacher. So it's a wide range. One of the one pushback, we've gotten a couple of pushbacks. One from academics who say, there's no way anyone can master all the content. And as a result, you're trafficking out of your own field. My response to that is, yeah, I don't know the physics. But I got to tell you something, I'm using the best physics I can find, and how am I finding it? I'm looking at your peer-reviewed journals and the best physicists. So guess what? I'm promoting the best content in your field. I'm not claiming to be a physicist. And this is multidisciplines and not necessarily interdiscipline. We teach the differences in it. There's a great assignment we give the kids. We say, you've got to solve this problem. You've got 5 scholars. You have to help solve it. Who do you pick and why? And then what they have to do is think, what does a chemist bring to the table? What does an anthropologist bring to the table? That's talking about disciplinarity in a way that gives it a respect. So that's one I think large response. And then the other is that you're functioning at such a high level that you're really missing all the details of the human story. And I think where that's wrong-headed is that if it is true that you're only at that abstract level, the micro level, it's true, human beings don't function in it. But the course tacks back and forth between the micro and the macro. And so, we're looking at, like, why did Darwin belong to pigeon clubs, right? Darwin belonged to pigeon clubs because they were breeding pigeons. And that helped him understand evolution. And so that information about, what Darwin was doing, that's a human story. I told you the first investigation is, how did human beings change their mind? You can't get to a more human story than why does Copernicus go against 2,000 years of history to put the sun in the center of a solar system? By what logic was he doing this? That's a pretty human story. So I think that because we've intentionally tacked back and forth between this, if you go to the OER project site now, you'll discover that there's a bunch of one-page comic biographies, graphic biographies of human beings created by this guy, Trevor Getz, who's a brilliant historian at San Francisco State. And what Trevor did is he said, what if we take a biography and we get a graphic, and what it does is it shows the larger context of this human's life, so that you see how the environment and the context, the political context, is affecting this person on one single page. And kids are now then loving it. They're adopting. In fact, you could see that the whole virtue of that comic. Like I said, 14 billion years and 13 years of study, I can go on all night.
Let's open it up to the audience, both here and online.
Michael Shaw from the online. He says, I'm a middle school social studies teacher in Ann Arbor, and he asks if you have ever considered collaborating with the School of Ed's Read, Inquire, Write team to develop inquiry-based materials with them.
Yeah, so what he's talking about is a wonderful project that my colleague Chauncey Montesano and Mary Schleppengrill, now emeritus, designed for middle school teachers. The answer is no, but only not because it's not valuable and useful, but because the Big History Project has its own Read, Write, and Inquire investigations, and they're structured such that they can use it in middle school. In fact, the Big History class is gravitating to the middle school in part because high school doesn't, there's so many requirements in a high school course. And what we do is, I'm a great fan of the work that Dr. Montesano and Dr. Schleppengrill did. A lot of that work is informed the stuff that we do in the Big History Project. But, by the way, great materials. Read, write, and inquire. A lot of good stuff coming out of the School of Ed at U of M.
Great presentation.
Thanks.
I had no idea what you're going to talk about, because this is nowhere near my lane, so to speak. I, for the last 14 years, have run a mentoring program for young black males out of the Detroit public school system. And one of my major goals in that, I call it a CEO development program for 15-year-olds. And part of that ability to start that process of people that can become like Bill Gates, who I often talk about a lot, is this the ability to think globally.
Right.
And so I'm thrilled by the things that you went through. It's been wonderful. And I'm wondering if you could say a bit more about how this works at the high school level. You have the concept of the scaffolding and presenting material at the appropriate level for students, which I think is perhaps much more important for high school students as opposed to graduate or undergraduate students. So can you talk a little bit more about that?
A lot.
And if the second question or suggestion, perhaps for later, is there a place somewhere in all of this that is good for someone who is very much a novice for this type of activity, which serves as an entry point for a person like myself for high school students? Thank you.
Yeah. Let me take the second question first. When I say all this material is free, it is free for everyone. So if you were to go to the site and say you want to sign up for Big History, you'll get access to a teaching credential course. You could run your own course. And what that will give you is all the teacher supports and all the student material. You could go through this totally on your own, at your own pace, and pick and choose what you want. And because there's so many videos that are short, you see how David's videos are. In the world history course, there's, I'm all through that, doing short little videos. They're really useful. We've become incredibly important with homeschoolers. Incredibly important. They're not even in that when I talk about the 2,000 schools, but the people that are homeschooling are using this material for all kinds of virtuous reasons, right? I can show you some of the stuff afterwards, but let me talk a little bit about scaffolding, because that really is my own research. Scaffolding is anything that will support your thinking that is external to you. The best example I can use of a scaffold is the cell phone. I'll bet you and I look like we're almost the same age, but I would bet you that at once upon a time you knew phone numbers, right? I knew lots of phone numbers. I know 5 right now. I know my cell, my wife's cell, my home number, my office number, and my Google Voice number. I've got 3 grown kids that live on the West Coast. I can't tell you their phone numbers. I don't even care. But with this, I've got probably 3,000 phone numbers in here. So with this, as a scaffold, man, am I smart, right? So one of the things that we do, we look at things that can scaffold our thinking, that help me think in a more sophisticated way. So one is language. I'll give you a small example of this. This came out of work that I was doing in Detroit in the year about 2000. Trying to get kids to read and read in a more sophisticated way. And the kids would just want to know what was the question at the back of the text. And so 2 doc students and I, Stephen Muker, who's now at Bard, and Mimi Lee, who's a scholar at Seoul National University in Korea, were puzzling over when do we read in a more active way. And we then theorized that whenever we sit down to read something, we've got a theory about what we'll find there. We've got a conjecture, right? I'm a Cleveland Cavaliers fan. They're playing tonight. I've got a theory about what I'm going to find when I turn the radio on, right? So when I turn that radio on, the information can do only one of 3 things. Pause. It can only support. Here's a language tool. It can support what I currently think, a conjecture. It could extend it, or it could challenge it. Those 3 verbs end up situating a learner as an active reader and an active thinker. If I say, no matter what you're going to do, what's your theory about that? We once ran a curriculum years ago, a U.S. history curriculum on why would anyone move to Detroit? And what it did was focusing on Detroit as once upon a time, the fourth largest city in America. Why did Native people move to this area? Why did immigrants from all across the world? And we just add kids to conjecture. Why do you think? And some kid said to me, "You're from Cleveland, man. You don't have good sports teams. The reason why people move to Detroit, our sports teams are better than yours." Did we tell him no? Heck no. We said, "Wait, that's a pretty good theory." And then we tested it. Is that why people did? Did the new information support, extend, or challenge? See what it is? It's a scaffold that changes your thinking. There are visual scaffolds. I spend a lot of time about what is a visual scaffold. The periodic table is nothing but a visual scaffold. It enables me to think about how everything is organized. So what we do is we do a lot of the design on that. What we do is we take where a learner is, where we want them to be, and we don't curse them because they're not there or grumble because they're not there. We ask ourselves the question, what can I do to give them that to get there? What's the cell phone that I can enable Bob to have far more knowledge of phone numbers than he does now? If you ask that question, then all of a sudden you end up with great supports for kids. When I taught high school, I stumbled on this. It's theories out of psychological literature. And there were all kinds of stuff on my high school wall that helped my kids do far more thinking than they could possibly do. I had to think. We determined what made something significant in history. Most kids think if something's significant in history, research says this, it's one of two things. It's of interest to them personally, or an authority that I care about tells me it's important. Now, if the kid doesn't care about the authority, like it's going to be on the test, I don't care about it, not important. And if it's not of your interest, that's not the way things are really made significant. It's important. So we had kids determine what made something significant. I won't even go through the exercise. And they listed 5 rules for determining what makes something significant. An experience that they had. Then what did I do? That became a significance tool. Hung in my classroom. We studied the agricultural revolution. I said, the textbook, you're going to read about the agricultural revolution. I don't want you to memorize any of that stuff. I don't want you to answer the questions at the back. What I want you to do is to take your 5 tools for what makes something significant and tell me whether that author determined, made a good case for it. And the kid said, whoa, like, that textbook weighs 12 pounds. You want me to critique the textbook? Yeah, I want to know, did that guy make a good case for why the agricultural revolution should be in the book? Now, guess what? In critiquing it, using their rules, that's a scaffold, right? It's not of interest to them. And I didn't say you have to do it. Your rules, apply it. It's a conjecture. They made a bet. And somehow they engage in it, and guess what? They learn about the agricultural. Now, they may not agree. That's a scaffold. Does that make sense?
Yes, very much so.
I can send you stuff that I've written on scaffolding. It's always a danger to ask an academic.
I'm not a plant either. I didn't know that
You're sitting next to my wife. Did she nudge and say, ask about scaffolding?
She didn't whisper.
I think we have time for maybe one more question.
So there's a comment on YouTube that I wanted to share that I thought was really nice from Rubith Ronquillo Hipolito. I hope I pronounced that correctly. She said, "This is extremely helpful. I have been teaching big history in the Philippines for almost 6 years. Each year I want to improve on content and delivery. An avenue like this will allow me to do that." So,
Wonderful.
and then I have the question.
Good.
So I work here at the Observatory with a lot of our student docents. I've brought them in here because I wanted them to sort of learn from you a little bit. And we are sort of this informal education museum, right? It's docent-led. It's a lot of exhibits and displays. I wanted to know if you had any sort of, simple thoughts. You don't have to go way into it, but anything basic that advice you might have for us in meeting the various backgrounds of our visitors and sort of making it an interesting, engaging experience that they learn from.
I'll try and be short. I fell into a research project with Henry Ford years ago that ended up people thinking I was a museum educator, which was fun. I ended up being on the Museum Studies Advisory Board. We published some on this. I'll make the same argument that essentially Dewey makes about problems. When I took kids to field trips to museums, I never did it well. And they would, go, and the thing that was most interesting to them was a souvenir shop. that they couldn't wait to get. And then they would buy the souvenirs that I think weren't very educational. It took me a long time to realize that I didn't give them a question or a problem for why they were going. It's amazing. When someone has a curiosity about something, then you have to stand in their way. So the best museums, from my experience, set up juxtapositions that creates a problem that causes me to go, whoa. Now, if I can't do that by myself, or the museum didn't do it, then I do think you need someone to help you. And so, like I once gave a talk at the De Young Museum just about this. The De Young Museum has the Young Museum's in San Francisco, an amazing collection of cigar store Indians. You know those Indians, the wood Indians in cigar stores? And I, all of a sudden, got really curious and said, why were Native people the ones, why were caricatures of Native people out in front of cigar stores? Why were they so well carved? Who was doing this? And I posed a whole series of questions. And I said, that seems to me a hook that would get somebody to spend a little more time looking at that cigar store Indian. And then maybe beginning to think about the questions he would ask. But I'm sure that's what you do. When it goes well, it seems to me that you've seduced, that's a dangerous word, but education in some ways is a seduction to engage people in the kind of thinking that you want them to do, or that will help them grow more sophisticated. And again, I'm a big aficionado of Dewey. I think that he's right. Problems cause me to think. I can go on and on about that. How many times have you driven to work and, at the end of the day said, how did I get here today, right? Because you drove exactly the same way, your mind wasn't there, unless there's snow on the ground. And the first snow, it's a problem. And all of a sudden, you're thinking about it. If I can create a problem, which I might be doing right now, which might be then causing you to think. And so it's that kind of stuff, right? Like you're all sitting in chairs, and you're probably unaware of the feeling of the chair until now, right? Because I created a problem, right? All of that kind of stuff, I think, just simply works. By the way, one quick comment about Dewey. Dewey's argument was that we evolved to have problems serve that purpose, because animals have that as well. That our physiology is such that if things are copacetic in the environment, we don't notice it. You come into a room and it smells, after a couple of minutes, you don't notice the smell. But if you walk out and come back in, it goes, oh, that still smells. It's because your body adapts to it. Dewey argued that in terms of evolution is that when there's a disturbance in the environment, if you're evolved to pay attention to the disturbance, which means things, you'll survive longer. And essentially, that's a problem. How about that? How about summing up democracy and education in 30 seconds?
Well, that's going to give me something to think about. That's a problem for me to think about this evening. But thank you for that really fascinating talk, Bob. And thank all of you for joining us, both online and in person this evening. Thanks as well to Austin for monitoring the live stream comments, and our wonderful Michigan media team making this visible to everybody. Tonight's session will be available online on YouTube, and we'll send everybody who registered to attend a link in about a week and a half, so you can watch this again, share it with your friends, share it with any teachers you know, share it with any students you know, and say, hey, why don't you show this to your teacher and ask them what's going on. If you're here at the observatory tonight, the original observatory is going to be open upstairs for a little while, till about 9 o'clock. We have some wonderful student docents to show you around if you head up there. I think it'll probably be a little too late for viewing, but you can at least see the telescopes. And if you're not here tonight, we're open, we always change this. We're open several nights a week. You can find our wonderful website at detroitobservatory.umich.edu. Thank you all again. Have a wonderful evening.
Thanks so much.